So reverse harem is a pretty hit or miss genre of romance anime. Reverse harem is just one of those genres of romance anime that can really fall flat and enter into at times really strange and ridiculous territory due to the very unconventional nature of the genre and the oftentimes, not gonna lie, kinda cringy and ethically questionable use of certain tropes within the genre in order to try and grab the attention of its audience. After all, the genre at its core is heavily based in catering to its audience's messy desire to be seen as special enough to be fought over, and all the drama that surrounds that type of fantasy. Taking this aspect of reverse harem into account and seeing the way that it has resulted in the creation of many, more or less messy fan service focused romance animes, it's really not that surprising that the genre of reverse harem has a less than positive reputation, with a niche community that mostly partakes in the genre as a guilty pleasure. After all, it truly is a different and rare kind of breed of romance anime watcher that takes joy in the absolute chaos that is the genre of reverse harem. However, there has been one particular reverse harem anime that has somehow miraculously managed to rise up from the depths of all the other forgotten reverse harem romance animes out there to an almost cult-like following status, being one of the most recognizable titles to come out of the genre. Now, the reason as to why this particular reverse harem series has become more or less an icon in the romance anime community is not for the reasons that you would traditionally think a series would become popular and widely talked about. You know, you think of the word iconic and you imagine a masterfully done work of art or something like that. But no, the reason this particular reverse harem anime has reached its icon status is not as a result of being some type of work of art, but by instead being, in every way possible, arguably the worst romance anime ever to exist. This reverse harem has managed to somehow be so bad and problematic to the point where it has become the guilty pleasure of many trash-loving romance anime watchers that somehow find humor in just how garbage this anime is. I mean the plot, incoherent, the romance, psychologically damaging, the character writing, non-existent, the morality and ethics of this entire piece of media, undoubtedly questionable. And with all of this, the fact that this series is a supernatural story about a bunch of angsty vampire brothers is just the cherry on top of the cake of this absolutely absurd anime. I am of course talking about the problematic and controversial icon itself, Diabolik Lovers. If I were to describe Diabolik Lovers is what you get when you take the everyday sheltered church girl's fantasy of being noticed by the no-good, edgy, hot bad boy, multiply that bad boy by 6, sprinkle in a bit of emo and alt-boy aesthetics, vampires, spicy boyfriend ASMR, daddy issues as well as mommy issues, trauma, a dash of no self-respect, and then you proceed to light it all on fire. And yeah, that's essentially what should be expected when one decides to get into Diabolik Lovers. Now, Diabolik Lovers is another reverse harem series that I had discovered during a very particular part of my childhood when I was just eating up messy romance anime and manga, with reverse harem being the main source of entertainment at the time for a hot anime man brain-rotten 11-year-old me. Although my obsession with reverse harem has greatly reduced over the years, Diabolik Lovers has been a series that I found myself unable to forget due to the bizarre fact that Diabolik Lovers, with all its issues, has managed to pretty much fail upwards to icon status in the romance anime community. I mean, it really is a rather impressive feat for something to just be so bad that it becomes iconic. Diabolik Lovers' icon status without a doubt has a lot to do with how much people love to make fun of this series online for how bad it is, which is honestly not surprising because there is just an immense amount of trash-talking material with this series. Sometimes there is fun to be had in a series that's just so bad it's comical, and I guess that's why Diabolik Lovers is oddly a guilty pleasure to so many. And of course you have those that do take Diabolik Lovers seriously, and they make up the more questionable part of the community. But we don't talk about them. Now, despite this series being one that's kind of always been in the subconscious of my mind, along with the other sins of my past, it had actually been quite a long time since I'd gone back to revisit this series, and as I've been curious about the media that I used to consume in my childhood, I wanted to go back and revisit Diabolik Lovers and examine it from a more critical lens, now that I'm older than I was when I had first come across the series. I wanted to understand more about Diabolik Lovers on a deeper level and try to rationalize in my head how it is that this series became so popular. So in preparation for this video, I had gone back to rewatch all of the Diabolik Lovers anime, as well as for the first time look into the content that exists of Diabolik Lovers outside of the anime. After revisiting and learning more about the absolute chaos that is the story of Diabolik Lovers, I just knew that I had to do some type of deep dive into the series in order to truly try and break down the many messy layers to this very controversial reverse harem. And yeah, that's basically what this video is going to be about. So if you're interested, feel free to walk with me into the depths of hell and dive into the one and only Diabolik Lovers. So before I go further into Diabolik Lovers, I think it's important to first establish exactly what Diabolik Lovers is for those that are uninformed, and perhaps maybe even answer the most wondered question on the minds of those who have seen Diabolik Lovers of why? Just why? So to start off, Diabolik Lovers is based on the Diabolik Lovers Ultimate Game franchise, and the Diabolik Lovers anime was largely made to support the marketing of the games. The first game in the series came out in 2012, and if I'm correct, there are about 7 games in the franchise. Yep, you heard that right. There are 7 of these games. If I'm correct, then the order of release goes as Diabolik Lovers Haunted Dark Bridal, Diabolik Lovers More Blood, Diabolik Lovers Vanded Carnival, Diabolik Lovers Dark Fate, Diabolik Lovers Lunatic Parade, Diabolik Lovers Lost Eden, and Diabolik Lovers Chaos Lineage. Without a doubt, More Blood has got to be the most creative title out of the bunch. They really had some heat on their pens with that one. Now, as of the time that I'm recording this, there has not been any English translation made of the games, nor has there been any official Western release. However, I did try and do a little research into the games by looking up reviews and other type of fan translations online, because although a big focus of this deep dive will be the anime, I will be going into details provided in the games and extra content, in order to fill in the gaps and piece together the things that weren't clear in the anime due to how incoherent it can be at times. With that, I'm gonna give a general summary of the story of Diabolik Lovers in order to give a little refresher to those who maybe haven't seen the anime for some time or at all, as well as in order to lay the groundwork for the rest of this deep dive into the series. So Diabolik Lovers follows the story of our heroine in this chaotic tale, which is a 17-year-old girl named Yui Komori, who is the daughter of a priest named Seiji Komori. When Yui's father Seiji is summoned for church-related business in Eastern Europe, Seiji tells Yui that she is to move in with some distant relatives while he is away, providing Yui with no further details about the place she is to move into. When Yui arrives at the address of these distant relatives, she finds herself at the Sakamaki house, a large eerie-looking mansion that is rumored by many to be haunted. Upon first glance, Yui feels uneasy with the state of her new place of residence. But that sense of unease only grows once Yui comes face to face with who, and more importantly, what lies behind the walls of the Sakamaki house.
Is anyone home?
Yui comes to learn that what dwells at the Sakamaki house are not her distant relatives, but instead the mysterious daylight-deprived sadistic group of brothers, the Sakamaki brothers, who Yui quickly comes to fear, as she learns that even worse than them being a group of angsty alt-boys, they are also a group of bloodthirsty vampire brothers, hungry for her blood. The Sakamaki brothers consist of Shu, Reiji, Aito, Kaneto, Laito, and Subaru Sakamaki. Along with this revelation, Yui's whole world is turned upside down when she discovers the truth that the man she thought she knew as her father was actually not her father, and that she had been purposely lied to about the truth of the Sakamaki house, in a scheme by her father's church to offer her up as a sacrificial bride to the Sakamaki brothers. The story of Diabolik Lovers then follows Yui trying to find a way to survive under the hand of the Sakamaki brothers, as they persistently crave for blood that is described as being irresistible, all the while trying to maintain her faith and sanity as she is subjected to the sadistic nature of the Sakamaki brothers, who each carry a dark history that have made them into the cold-hearted beings that they are, as well as Yui trying to discover more about her role as a sacrificial bride, and the conspiracy and truth behind her being sent to the Sakamaki house, which has something to do with her father, the Sakamaki's uncle, Richter, and a mysterious woman named Cordelia. So yeah, that is the general plot of Diabolik Lovers, at least for Season 1. I won't be getting into Season 2 of Diabolik Lovers in this video, because there's just already too much to talk about with Season 1, so Season 2 will have to wait for now. But anyways, going on from here and this very surface level understanding of what Diabolik Lovers is, I'm now gonna explore deeper into the series, as well as pay reference to the games, because trust me when I say that the anime definitely does not do enough in its part to help make sense of this series. Alright, so one thing that I think is important to establish first when it comes to Diabolik Lovers is the general vibe and tone that this series has. Getting into Diabolik Lovers without knowing the tone that this series follows is just a disaster waiting to happen, because the content explored in this series is just utterly sickening at times, especially if you're playing the games, and it's not something that you want to jump into blind. This series is definitely not your everyday fluff-filled wholesome reverse harem, it is just far from that. This shit resides on an entirely different planet, not even that, it's in a whole different galaxy from reverse harems of that kind. I mean, Diabolik Lovers takes being different to just a whole other extreme, an illegal extreme. So let me first establish here that the content in Diabolik Lovers caters to a very specific type of audience, one that is far removed from any ideas of conventional romance. The overall vibe and tone of Diabolik Lovers very much plays into a type of audience that more or less takes pleasure in things such as being degraded and humiliated, because the love interests of this series are just complete sadists that treat this girl Yui like actual garbage. All throughout this series, the Sakamaki brothers called this girl Yui a bitch, a slut, and a whole bunch of other out-of-pocket insults for no reason at all. There is also just an immense amount of psychological and physical abuse that goes on in this series, and this is something that never changes. Like, this is just how things are in this series, and the audience is just supposed to accept it, and somehow find some type of weird sense of pleasure in all of it. Like, this series is basically where self-respect goes to die, and is just never recovered at any point. This series quite literally unapologetically slaps you in the face and expects you to be happy about it, and then come back for more.
What do we have here?
I repeat, do not jump into this series expecting anything close to a normal, healthy, happy, and fulfilling romance anime. It's just not here. Bringing focus to the anime, from the first episode to the last episode, there really isn't any point where this tone changes throughout the story, because as I'll get into later, a consistent and reoccurring theme throughout this series is the Sakamaki brothers acting in a very cruel and humiliating way towards Yui. And this cruel type of sadistic treatment is what the audience is supposed to get a kick out of. I mean, if we look at the games for further context into this type of tone, even the choices that the player makes in the games are divided by being either sadistic type choices or masochist type choices. And the ending you get is determined on the meter of masochistic and sadistic dialogue options you choose throughout the game. So yeah, Diabolik Lovers as a series is very much rooted in the idea of sadism and masochism. So although the average romance anime watcher may not enjoy being called every insult in the book, and watching a self-insert heroine being subjected to vast amounts of torment, that's kind of the whole point of Diabolik Lovers, and that's why I'd greatly advise against going into this series without knowledge of the type of story that it's trying to tell. When it comes to the whole theme of sadism and masochism in the series and the dark tone of it all, it really is done to a very extreme extent, which I will also be touching on. But for the sake of wrapping up this point, let me just say that Diabolik Lovers is definitely not for everybody. It takes a very rare type of person to enjoy all that Diabolik Lovers has to offer.
Okay, here's your prize of one little bitch.
With the tone and general vibe of Diabolik Lovers explained, I wanted to touch on how this tone bleeds into the overall aesthetic and art direction of the series. Because as can be seen by both the anime and the games, the series definitely follows a very gothic and alternative type vibe. Like, this series just screams edgy. Okay, it's giving very early 2010s Hot Topic emo. Despite the main events of Diabolik Lovers taking place in the modern era, with Yui having a cell phone and other type of technology shown, the series very much goes out of its way to try and make everything look very gothic and antique. I mean, the Sakamaki house is just one big stereotypical gothic mansion. Like, you can just tell that shit is not right with this place. Okay, they're like living in Forgotten Hollow from The Sims. The bitches are practically screaming that they're vampires. In terms of how I think that this aesthetic is executed in the series, I do think that the whole vibe of it all creates a weird, almost anachronistic feeling. Whenever the story reminds you at random times that it is very much taking place in the modern era, Like, throughout the majority of the anime, you see the characters dressed in more formal wear and interact with all these antique objects and environments. But then at random moments, you just get a scene of the Sakamaki brothers pulling up to school in a limousine, and it's just like the most out-of-place looking thing. Like, you can't tell me that these guys don't look like they pull up to school in an old-timey looking horse carriage, with a coach named some shit like Sir Oliver II. Like, I don't know, that's just the type of vibe that they give me. There was also like a moment in the anime where the main city was shown when Yui had ran away, and it also just looked super out of place. Like, there were just way too many fluorescent lights and flat screens for the story about a bunch of 18th century looking vampires. Like, just try and picture dusty ass Richter walking into a 7-Eleven. You just can't, can you? Which I guess leads me to the character design in Diabolik Lovers. Honestly, a whole fashion analysis can probably be made about how all over the place the characters look and how they don't fit the era that they're living in. It's just atrocious. Once again, it's all giving like 18th century emo. If there's one thing that you could count on when it comes to the triplets, it's that they're definitely gonna show some leg. Without fail, 24/7, they will be in capri or in some other type of cuff leg style. I mean, do we even got to mention that godforsaken hat glued on top of Lido's head? Just an absolute crime to society. Reiji looks the most stuck in the 18th century. Subaru looks like he was attacked by wolves, which by the way is an actual thing that happens in season 2. Shu looks the most out of place when standing next to the other brothers. He's the only one dressed like he could actually be from the 21st century. This guy has his headphones wrapped around his neck like a choker, just like the edgy bitch that he is. And when it comes to Yui, I mean, she's okay, but those shorts are just ridiculously big. The fashion may not be the best, and it's definitely dated, which I'll give the series the benefit of the doubt since it came out in the early 2010s. Somehow these characters look like they exist in every era at the same time. Despite all that, I do think that the overall art style is the better part of the series, especially if we're talking about the games and the official art. The gothic vibe of it all can be really interesting at times. Once again, it's just the weird anachronistic moments that kind of throw things off for me. The last thing I want to talk about, or rather I just need to talk about when it comes to the aesthetic and artistic choices of Diabolik Lovers, is the audio and the music of the series. Okay, what we're not about to do is sit here and pretend that the opening songs to this anime are not straight up works of art, because they are just too good. It should be illegal the amount of heat that they put into these opening songs for an anime series that is just so trash. It's like you start up an episode, you hear Mr. Sadistic Knight, you get hype, and then you remember what you're watching. The guilt is immense, but I won't apologize, because I still eat at Mr. Sadistic Knight to this day. Now that we got that out of the way, I need to address the audio choice that was made in this series that was an actual crime, an atrocious one. And that crime is the absolutely unnecessary emphasis that the series puts on mouth sounds. I hate it, I just hate it. Being a series about vampires, it's to be expected that there would be a lot of blood-sucking moments, but what was completely uncalled for was the amount of times that this anime went out of its way to make me uncomfortable with all the moans, groans, slurps, and wet lip-smacking noises that were added to these blood-sucking scenes. Look, all I'm saying is do not watch this anime without headphones on. Because I swear, every 5 seconds these brothers make the most horrendous sounds imaginable. And if you have something along the lines of misophonia, yeah, I can't imagine that watching this anime will be the most enjoyable experience. The biggest crime to come out of this is that although I like Mr. Sadistic Knight, I can't enjoy it in peace because of the damn mouth sounds throughout the song. Now, this whole audio direction is another thing that's intentional with this series, especially if we look at the games for reference. It seems that Diabolik Lovers was onto the whole boyfriend ASMR thing before it was even a thing. A lot of the audio for Diabolik Lovers is said to have been recorded with a dummy head microphone, or I think that the actual name for this type of recording is binaural audio, which is like a type of audio recording where the pickup of sound is distributed in a way that's supposed to be like how real human ears pick up sound. So the brothers are able to get right up close to your freaking ear and make all their annoying sucking sounds. I mean, I will say that the whole binaural audio thing is an interesting audio direction, and it probably would be to some degree effective in immersing the player in the game. But I'm sorry, when it comes to all those up-close whispers and lip-smacking noises where I can just imagine the Sakamaki brothers' hot-ass breath, I just can't do it. I can't. As a whole, I will say that for the most part, the aesthetic and artistic choices of Diabolik Lovers are pretty clear and consistent. Like I said, you very much get the vibe that this series is dark and edgy. So in that regard, I guess that Diabolik Lovers succeeds to some degree artistically. Now that I've kind of laid the groundwork for how Diabolik Lovers is as a series, I want to now get into the actual plot-relevant parts of the series. I specifically want to get into the lore of Diabolik Lovers, because I think that the lore and world-building of the series is probably one of the most poorly executed parts of the anime. The anime does so little to actually establish the lore of Diabolik Lovers. Like, it's super easy to forget at times that the anime even has a plot, when like 99% of it is just a Yui torture. So I actually want to explore the lore a bit because it does help to make a little more sense of everything that goes on in the anime. And even besides that, the lore of Diabolik Lovers is just insane and problematic in its own right, so it just has to be talked about. I'm gonna start off by talking about the Sakamaki brothers and everything that relates to them, because I think that Yui's connection to the story makes much more sense once you have the groundwork laid for everything else. So yeah, I'm gonna start with them first. So as I mentioned earlier, there are 6 Sakamaki brothers. The Sakamaki brothers are mostly half-brothers, being born from 3 different mothers, which we're gonna get into in a bit. But anyways, they are all the sons of Karl Heinz, who is the king of vampires. These basic facts of the Sakamaki brothers are for the most part mentioned in the anime, but there's just so much insane stuff about their backstories that are just entirely cut from the anime. Anyways, the Sakamaki brothers are as in order. The first son, Shu Sakamaki, he is the slacker amongst the brothers. He is characterized as being moody and having little interest in just about everything, except for the excessive desire to sleep all day. Without a doubt, making many a depressed bitch watching this anime say, "Wow, he just like me for real." Shu is by birth order the heir to Karl Heinz's throne, but due to him being uninterested in everything, he doesn't really care about this fact. Next we got Reiji, who is one of the most sadistic ones in the house. He is more or less the head of the Sakamaki house, who quite literally does all he can to whip those in the house into shape in order to maintain absolute control of everything. Let me just say quite plainly that this guy is insane. Like, I'm about to get into the lore and everything, but I just gotta throw it out there that based off what I've read and seen of the games, this guy was just born different, okay? Now, something that is also important to note is that Shu and Reiji are full brothers, sharing the same mother, Karl Heinz's second wife, Beatrix. Also, Reiji absolutely hates Shu's guts. He's Shu's #1 hater in the whole world. No one hates Shu more than Reiji does.
Good morning, good morning. Not you. You can choke.
Next, we got Ayato, who more or less gives off the impression that he's the default brother of the series. He's characterized as being very hot-headed, prideful, selfish, and entitled. You know, he's basically like the tsundere archetype. But if you just brought the tsundere up to 11 and chucked all sense of morality out the window, then we got Laito, who is a lot of things. Nothing good, I'll tell you that. He is definitely the most controversial brother in the series. Laito consistently provides the creep factor of the series, being one of the most predatory brothers towards Yui. And yeah, the guy is just not well as a person. And as I'll explain with the lore, there's many reasons as to why that probably is. Next we got Kaneto. I mean, just look at the guy. You can just tell that this man isn't right. He looks terrifying. Kaneto is definitely high up there in the creep factor as well. To be honest, he doesn't really have to try. Just his whole existence is pretty unpleasant in the anime. Kaneto is pretty heavy into delusions and jumping to conclusions when it comes to his interactions with Yui, and all scenes with him are just like the most unsettling moments ever. He also has Teddy. Yeah, we're gonna get into that too. Ayato, Laito, and Kaneto are also a set of full brothers from Karl Heinz's first wife, Cordelia. Lastly, we have Subaru, who's just angst itself. This guy's anger is always at 10 for no reason at all. Ass cheeks on full clench 24/7. There is never a moment where this guy is just calm and relaxed. Such things do not exist in his world. In terms of the anime, Subaru is definitely the lesser shitty one out of the brothers, or at least he starts out like that. He's too busy punching walls and other inanimate objects to even be bothered with Yui for the majority of the anime. Again, he's more just angst than he is predatory, unlike his other brothers. Subaru is the son of Krista, Karl Heinz's third wife. Now what needs to be understood about the Sakamaki brothers throughout the story is that they are fatherless. Now it's not that they have no father entirely, like I said, they're the sons of Karl Heinz. However, Karl Heinz is a very shit father. He jumped ship a long time ago, and all the brothers have become ever the more bitter people during the main events of the story, coping with this state of fatherlessness. Now I'm going to explain a bit more about Karl Heinz because the anime practically never touches on him, but what needs to be understood about him is that he is essentially the root cause of everything bad in the story. However, the bigger issue that the Sakamaki brothers have is not actually with him, but their mothers. This series goes beyond mommy issues. The Sakamaki brothers' backstories are insane. So in terms of the anime, for the most part we aren't given a lot of context into the issues between the Sakamaki brothers and their parents, which is a pretty big aspect of the story to not include considering how it would at least partially explain why the Sakamaki brothers are the way that they are. But to some degree, maybe it was for the better because the backstories are just very dark and would have likely made the anime just even more upsetting and controversial. So when it comes to the actual backstories of the brothers, I'm going off of information I've learned from reading reviews and summaries of the games, so please bear in mind that I'm going off of other people's translations of the games. So to start off, the story of Diabolik Lovers takes place in a world where there are a bunch of different races of supernatural beings that are all descended from one original demon race known as the Founders. The other supernatural races aren't exactly important for this timeline of events yet, but just know that stuff like werewolves start coming into the mix. Among these races are the vampires, and Karl Heinz, like I said, is the king of vampires. But he disguises himself to the rest of the world as Togo Sakamaki, a famous Japanese politician, hence the name Sakamaki. Karl Heinz also has a younger brother, Richter, who's mentioned a lot in the story. The story with Richter is actually kinda simple. He pretty much has a big inferiority complex when it comes to his brother because of how much stronger he is than him, and he basically wants to gain power to take everything that Karl Heinz has. Yeah, so that's pretty much it with him. Getting back to Karl Heinz, basically Karl Heinz's whole goal is that he wants to construct a new race of supernatural beings that are stronger than all of the already existing supernatural races. So Karl Heinz is a very twisted man that will go to great lengths to achieve this goal. And one of the ways he goes about trying to figure out how to make this new race of supernatural beings is by experimenting using his own blood. And by this, I am referring to his children. Each of the Sakamaki brothers are the product of Karl Heinz's experimenting to make crossbred vampires. Cordelia, the first wife, is a hybrid between vampire and a founder demon. And if I'm correct, I believe that she is descended from the king of demons, making her blood extra powerful. Richter had actually fought for the hand of Cordelia, but lost to Karl. And as we see in the anime, he becomes like this pathetic man who does everything that Cordelia tells him to. Beatrix, the second wife, is a pure-blood vampire, just like Karl. And now, before I go further about Karl's third wife, I just want to say that in terms of the title of Worst Reverse Harem Anime Ever, I've always struggled to determine which was worse, Brothers Conflict or Diabolik Lovers. And after what I'm about to say, I think that it can be agreed once and for all that, as a whole, Diabolik Lovers is definitely worse, because the third wife, Krista, who is also a pure-blood vampire, is Karl Heinz's own cousin. So yeah, the Sakamaki brothers are all to some degree the product of Karl Heinz's experimenting with crossbreeding. Aito, Laito, and Kanato are an attempted crossbreed between pure-blood vampire and demon through Cordelia. When it comes to Shu and Reiji, they have 100% pure vampire blood, through Beatrix also being a pure-blood vampire. And as for Subaru and his mother Krista, Karl Heinz purposely wanted to have a child that was the product of incest. I don't even know what this man was trying to achieve by doing all of that. This guy is just weird as hell. When it comes to Krista, it should be noted that her backstory with Karl had been retconned after the first game. Her backstory was retconned to reveal in later games that she had apparently loved Karl and married him willingly, which was not the case in the first game. So yeah, that's a little bit of an inconsistency in the lore that I felt should be pointed out. I mean, it doesn't make the incest any better, but the implications were definitely a lot worse at one point. And look, this is just a warning that a lot of the backstories I'm going to talk about are gonna get pretty dark. So as a result of Karl-Heinz being an absolute monster, all 3 of Karl's wives took out the misery they had from being used by him out on their children, resulting in the Sakamaki brothers all having either very complicated or horrible relationships with their mothers. Shu was kept on a strict and tight leash by his mother as she wanted him to be a suitable heir for Karl's throne, and this pressure had led to Shu never experiencing a proper childhood. As a result of Shu getting all of his mother's attention, Reiji would also grow jealous of Shu, and would out of hatred for Shu, kill Shu's one and only friend, Edgar. He would set Edgar's village on fire, and being a human, Edgar was assumed dead. But if you know anything about Diabolik Lovers, then you would know that that's not entirely true. Anyways, from there on, Shu would shut out the world and develop a very disconnected way of living and treating people. Getting to Reiji, surprisingly Reiji doesn't have that much of a dark backstory. Like, Beatrix didn't really do much to him besides ignore him. Which, don't get me wrong, that is bad, but he definitely had it a lot easier than some of the other brothers. He burned down a whole ass village just because he was jealous. Like, he's just a menace entirely on his own. In addition, he also goes on to kill Beatrix alongside Yui's father, who by the way is an undercover vampire hunter. And anyways, when Beatrix ends up saying that she was happy to die by Reiji's hands, this man Reiji then proceeds to dedicate God knows how many years of his life to make a potion to resurrect Beatrix just so that he could kill her again in a more satisfying way. Like, he's just a certified hater. The triplets Ayato, Laito, and Kanato honestly have it the worst in terms of backstory. I'ma just say it right now, fuck Cordelia. Literally everything is this bitch's fault. She's just a vile person. I don't even know if I can say all of what she exactly did in this video, but trust me when I say that it's awful. Once Karl-Heinz took in more wives and had children with them, Cordelia became jealous and took out her anger on the triplets in the worst ways possible. Cordelia was a very abusive mother to Ayato, both mentally and physically. She would put a lot of pressure on him to be better than Shu and inherit Karl's throne, and whenever Ayato would display any type of imperfection, she would only increase her acts of cruelty towards him. It's kind of assumed that the reason why Ayato is so shamelessly arrogant is because him acting in such a way is kind of like a middle finger to Cordelia, who never thought that he was good enough. Another big part of the triplets' backstories is the affair that Cordelia and Richter started having when the triplets were young, and how the 2 of them were extra gross about it by rubbing it in the faces of the triplets. Kanato's main thing is that he was pretty much traumatized by Cordelia and Richter being gross in front of him. The whole thing made him develop trust issues and a weird kind of mother complex, which is apparently why Kanato is so obsessed with Teddy as it was given to him by Cordelia, and it represents the weird kind of mother complex feelings that he has. As for Laito's backstory, I don't even know how to describe it. So in Laito's backstory, it's revealed that Laito and Cordelia had a very, let's just say, close relationship. I don't want to get into the gross details, but I think it's clear enough what I'm trying to hint at here. The whole thing is just really disgusting. Cordelia had pursued this sick relationship with Laito and manipulated him to do a lot of her bidding. Laito even apparently did a lot of unaliving on her behalf. At one point in his backstory, he and Cordelia end up getting discovered by Karl, and for some reason only Laito is punished. To top it all off, Cordelia also apparently gets weird with Richter in front of Laito's cell. Like, the shit is just twisted. So because of all of this stuff, Laito has also developed a kind of mother complex, and is a very perverted person because of the warped view of love and women he has as a result of his very twisted relationship with Cordelia. Basically, the reason why the triplets are so messed up is because of how terrible Cordelia had treated them. Anyways, the bitch gets what's coming to her because, as shown in the anime, the triplets devise a plan to get rid of her, and they to some degree succeeded in doing this, at least for a little while. Because if you know anything about the big reveal that happens in the anime, before Cordelia's body was burned by Kanato, she had her heart cut out by Richter and placed in Yui's body so that she could be resurrected. And that essentially ends up creating the main plot of the story. Anyways, lastly we got Subaru. Subaru's mom Krista at some point in time ended up finding out about Karl's experiments and all the stuff about the crossbreeding, and she ended up going into mental decline because of this knowledge. Krista was eventually locked up by Karl so that she wouldn't try to escape, and over time she had become more and more disgusted and fearful of him, which ended up carrying over into how she viewed and treated Subaru, with Krista constantly calling Subaru disgusting and just being very emotionally abusive towards him. This would cause Subaru to develop a lot of hatred for himself and his father, and he would become an overall very bitter and angry person from all of this. To top it all off, Krista, as we see in the anime, gives Subaru a knife that's able to end the life of a vampire with the hopes that he would put her out of her misery. Undoubtedly just doing even more mental damage to Subaru. I'm not sure if it's ever clear what happened to Krista. I think I might have missed something when researching about the games, but I believe that she does die at some point, but not because of Subaru, because he doesn't find it in him to use the knife against her. I mean, naturally. And yeah, all the while, Karl-Heinz is nowhere to be found when any of this shit goes down. I think it's also implied that he takes pleasure in all this torment, so yeah, he's just the worst dad ever. Prior to researching the games, I knew that Diabolik Lovers was a dark otome, but I definitely did not expect it to be this dark. Like I've dabbled in some other more mature and darker themed otome games before, but Diabolik Lovers really does take things to a whole nother level. Especially with all the incest related stuff. I was not expecting all of that. Anyways, the anime barely gets close to touching any of this lore about the brothers, which is definitely a point of confusion when watching the anime because you aren't given any answer as to why the brothers are the way that they are. You're just shown a bunch of out of context flashbacks that end up making zero sense with everything else going on throughout the story.
Mother, look! I finished memorizing this entire book.
However, I think that even if all this lore was added in, it still wouldn't have provided any type of justification for the actions of the Sakamaki brothers, because the way they go on to treat Yui throughout the anime is just terrible. Like, even for a dark otome, this is just a lot. Getting to Yui, her role in the story is probably the most confusing thing about the anime, as we're just thrown around words like sacrificial bride, but we're never actually given an explanation on what that means or why she's so special. And to be honest, from what I've seen, you're also barely given any of that in the games. So Yui as a character is just one big mystery. From what we are told briefly about her in the anime, we know that the reason why Yui's blood is so special is because Yui possesses the heart of Cordelia in her, who, as we've established, has powerful demon blood, which carried over into Yui's blood through her having Cordelia's heart, making Yui's blood irresistible to vampires and being a major source of power for them. How this came to be was that when Yui was a baby, she was abandoned around the same time that Cordelia had died, which according to Richter was pretty convenient as he was looking for a vessel to place Cordelia's heart in so that he could resurrect her. Because as was mentioned, Richter, for God knows why, loves Cordelia, and he hopes that if he resurrects her, she will give him the power needed to overthrow Karl-Heinz. For an unexplained reason, Yui ended up being a suitable vessel, and Richter went ahead and placed Cordelia's heart inside her body. Which, I just gotta say that this whole thing still makes zero sense to me, because how the hell do you put an adult-sized heart into a baby? Like, how the hell is that even possible? Anyways, as for how Yui ends up coming to live at the Sakamaki residence, after placing Cordelia's heart in her, Richter gave Yui over to be raised by Seiji. Again, Seiji is a priest, but he is also an undercover vampire hunter, and the church that he belongs to operates as an undercover organization for vampire hunters, who also happen to have a deal with the Sakamakis to offer up human girls as sacrificial brides to the Sakamaki brothers. Now this is where the whole sacrificial bride thing comes in, and things start to get a little confusing. Even after I've read up on the games, it's still not entirely clear what the sacrificial bride exactly is, so I may get some details wrong here. However, from what I can understand, the whole purpose of the sacrificial brides are to trigger some type of special awakening of vampire power within the sacrificial brides, by having the sacrificial brides continuously offer up their blood to the Sakamaki brothers. How and why this is supposed to trigger an awakening, I don't know. However, through this awakening, the Sakamaki brother that helps trigger the awakening to happen will apparently gain special powers that will allow them to be strong enough to take down Karl-Heinz and be the next vampire king. The reason why the church had agreed to offer up brides is because their main goal is to take down Karl-Heinz, so it would benefit them if one of the Sakamaki brothers were able to do that for them. Anyways, all of this doesn't really matter that much in the anime, because as we find out, the whole thing of Yui being a sacrificial bride was more or less just an excuse used by Richter in order to bring Yui over to the Sakamaki residence, because his true goal all along was to get Yui in his possession so that he could carry out the resurrection of Cordelia. So yeah, that's where Yui fits into the story. When rewatching the anime, I was surprised to see just how little of the story actually made sense, because like I've already said, a good 95% of this lore isn't explained in the anime, and it just makes the story so confusing. Like especially the whole sacrificial bride thing, that one is still hard for me to entirely understand. This is exactly why I think that a lot of otome games end up not translating well into anime adaptations, because there's always just so much content that is condensed into one short series, and the story usually ends up feeling very incomplete and rushed. As for whether or not I think that the anime would have benefited if more of the lore was included, I'm not sure if in the end it would have made it any better, like reception-wise. Because the thing is that the Diabolik Lovers anime as is in many ways already very unsettling and problematic, but be it the poor production or just how ridiculous the anime as a whole can be at times, for many who engage with the series in a less critical lens, the anime enters into that kind of trashy camp territory, which we've seen this happen with many other poorly received pieces of media, and this is likely why there's such a big community of hate watchers of this anime. However, with just how dark the lore of this series is, I think its inclusion in the anime would only highlight a lot of the other issues that this series has, and the anime would quickly go from being trashy to just pure disturbing, especially when it comes to all the Cordelia stuff and the surprisingly vast amounts of incest. I just don't think that the writing style of the anime could really execute a lot of these more heavy topics in a way that would improve the quality of the story, and I just think that the anime would have been remembered very differently if all the extra content had been added in. Now that I have gotten all of the lore out of the way and all the information that is vital in order to understand the story of Diabolik Lovers and its intent, I want to now focus on the anime and its adaptation, because it is by far one of the worst otome game adaptations ever, and probably one of the worst so-called romance animes ever as well. Okay, taking the music out of it, which is probably the only real redeeming quality of this anime, everything else is just an absolute incoherent dumpster fire of mess that can only be described as actual garbage. Starting with the romance factor of the anime. It's hard to truly say that Diabolik Lovers is a romance anime. It's definitely much more of a horror anime if anything. However, as I've already kinda mentioned, the whole cruelty and abuse aspect of this series is to some degree supposed to appeal to this whole idea of sadism and masochism, and the kind of thrilling taboo of it all, I guess you can say. So despite Diabolik Lovers definitely coming off as more of a horror, there is again to some degree a factor of intended romance to the story, at least implied romance, that the audience is supposed to pick up on. As for how this type of romance is showcased in the anime, I just need to talk about it because it is just bad shit insane. It's like toxic chemical waste bad. So yeah, sadism and masochism play a big part in the way that romance is depicted and implied throughout this anime. And with that, it would be an understatement to say that the type of romantic interactions we get in this anime are on the more unconventional side. Honestly, I think that even the word problematic would be an understatement, because actual full-on crimes are committed in this anime. Rather than getting, the more traditional indicators of romance that you see in other romantic stories, such as, I don't know, maybe some hand-holding, a kiss here and there. The indicators that we get of some type of intimate and romantic advancement between Yui and the Sakamaki brothers are basically just the Sakamaki brothers assaulting Yui, degrading her, humiliating her, and committing just all kinds of life sentence-worthy crimes against this poor girl. It's honestly shocking how I ever sat through this as a kid because it is just so bad. From the very moment that Yui enters the Sakamaki house, she is in constant active danger as these fatherless vampire brothers are just always making it their life's mission to make this girl's life hell by attacking her any chance they get for whatever bullshit reason they can find, and obnoxiously slurping on her blood every 5 seconds like she's some type of on-the-go juice box. The Sakamaki brothers have zero restraint. And I mean it when I say that they start acting like this immediately. It's like right when this girl walks through the door that they started doing all their weird vampire stuff. Yui doesn't even know that these guys are vampires at this point. We got Ayato, Laito, and Kanato looking on her like they're a pack of dogs. I mean, it's like they're wild animals the way that they treat this girl. This poor girl Yui doesn't even know how to respond. Okay, they were not getting down like this at the youth Bible camp back home. Yui is a God-fearing girl that carries Jesus drip everywhere she goes. She's never heard or seen anything like this before. I mean, these guys are growling in her ear and everything. Like, come on now, give the poor girl a break. So going on from the first episode, the brothers' treatment of Yui just gets progressively worse. And all this cruelty doesn't really have much of a point or purpose for happening in the anime. It's all just, again, this anime's very odd and twisted idea of sadomasochistic romance. With the way that the episodes play out, the tormenting of Yui is definitely meant to be the main highlight of each episode. It's hard to say that there are any real significant plot points or story arcs that are highlighted throughout the episodes. Every time one of the brothers are on screen, they just go straight to assaulting Yui. So yeah, we're definitely given a lot more reasons to hate and be weirded out by these brothers than we are to like them. Each episode, one or more of the Sakamaki brothers assaults Yui over reasons that are absolutely ridiculous and incomprehensible. I mean, this girl breathes weird and somehow that sets off these brothers. This abuse just gets worse whenever Yui tries to resist or fight back in any way, because these brothers are just completely delusional and believe that they own her and have the right to, as they say it, punish her. And it's not just physical torment that Yui goes through. These brothers are also pretty heavy on mentally tormenting Yui and actively trying to break her faith. Like, can't they just let this girl have one thing? They also just generally talk very disrespectfully towards Yui. Like, they call this girl every name in the book. Laito's nickname for Yui is literally Bitch-chan, and that's just his name for her. Like, he calls her that all the way up to the end. Again, to truly immerse yourself into this series, a slight shedding of self-respect is definitely needed, because the Sakamaki brothers just do not care. Can we just take a moment to acknowledge that Ayato's nickname for Yui is Pancake because she's apparently flat? Disrespectful. Like, damn, you didn't have to do her like that.
Hey, Pancake.
Further proof we have that all of this is to some degree supposed to be seen as romantic or in some way thrilling to the audience is the amount of, lack for better words, gaslighting this anime does to frame these scenes of the brothers as romantic. There's moments when these scenes are going down that romance music starts playing out of nowhere and it's all just so disorienting. Like, okay, I guess this is a romantic part. I just gotta point out that one scene with Ayato where he chucks Yui in the water only to go in and save her. And then the scene of him giving her mouth to mouth is like all cinematic and it's supposed to be an, oh my god, he saved her moment. Showing that he has a heart after all, which maybe could have been the case if he wasn't the one to throw her in the water. Like, Jesus. Another aspect of the romance in this anime that I feel I should mention is the anime's use of symbolism. And what I mean by this is instead of like how in other romance media where intimate actions are shown more directly through stuff like kissing and maybe even more, Diabolik Lovers takes a more indirect approach, using the scenes of vampire biting and blood-sucking throughout the anime. The blood-sucking scenes in Diabolik Lovers are pretty heavily coded as being more or less intimate and kind of sexual moments, which if you've watched the anime, it's something that's pretty easy to pick up on. The things that the brothers say when sucking Yui's blood are all very suggestive and really out of pocket sometimes. Romance music also plays in the background of a lot of these scenes, like it's all pretty plainly laid out for you to connect the dots. They talk about all kinds of weird and suggestive stuff, such as Yui getting excited and all kinds of weird stuff about their fangs.
You're getting excited, aren't you? What a dirty girl you are. I feel your temperature rising as my fangs caress your throat.
Like you're not fooling anybody, Diabolik Lovers. Something else I gotta touch on, which may or may not induce you with the feeling of needing to throw up, is that with these blood-sucking moments being symbolic of something sexual, there are heavy implications of incestuous undertones when these scenes involve the triplets, because as we know, Yui's blood is essentially Cordelia's blood. So when the triplets talk about being turned on by Yui's blood, yeah, it's a mess. Overall, the romance in this anime is pretty trash. Again, this is definitely much more of a horror anime if anything. When it comes to all the stuff relating to the sadism and masochism side of things and how it influences the romance factor of this anime, I understand that it's all fiction and that maybe all this stuff just isn't for me. However, I do think that there's a bit of misrepresentation going on with this whole idea of sadism and masochism that this whole series is founded on. And with this, I'm talking about the games as well. I think that writing this series off as just being a dark romance with sadism and masochism themes that some won't understand is a little bit off to me, because although I myself am not a person who is a part of the S&M community, I am under the assumption that consent is highlighted as being something very important in those types of spaces. This is something that is very much missing in Diabolik Lovers, which makes its use of sadism and masochism in order to excuse the stuff that is explored in the series a little bit off to me. Like, Yui is not a masochist, she's just a victim. There's never a point where she asked for any of this stuff to happen. As you progress in the games, Yui does eventually give some sort of okay for the Sakamaki brothers to drink her blood and do all this sadistic stuff towards her. But by the time that happens, we've already witnessed just a whole bunch of unconsensual acts, so like, the damage is already done by that point. As for the anime, none of this development ever happens. Up until the end, Yui does not consent to any of this stuff happening to her. So yeah, I just personally think that the use of sadism and masochism is just a cop-out for the series to get away with what is essentially just senseless abuse, but that's just my opinion. Again, I can acknowledge that maybe this type of romance dynamic just isn't for me, but I do think that it's fair to criticize this series for its possible misuse of certain themes, which in the case of the whole sadism-masochism thing, is a pretty big one used by both the marketing and the fanbase of Diabolik Lovers in order to write off a lot of the content that takes place in the series. Now that we've explored the romance of Diabolik Lovers, I want to now get into the overall direction of the anime and all its other failures that have led to Diabolik Lovers' infamous reputation as being one of the worst romance animes ever to exist. So I guess it should be noted that as Diabolik Lovers is adapted from an otome game, it's really not that surprising that the writing and direction of the anime is as bad as it is. Kind of the whole goal with otome game adaptations are to just promote the games that they are adapting, so it would seem that good execution of the anime itself is less important than the advertising of the otome game. A major issue that tends to follow most otome game adaptations is that due to the adaptation wanting to promote the game and trying to give the audience as much content from the game as possible so that they can build up hype, a lot of otome game adaptations tend to be very underdeveloped story-wise and character-wise. It's just hard to condense all the plot points of multiple routes into one unified story. Diabolik Lovers seems to have a significantly harder time doing this due to the episodes being much shorter than other animes, with the episodes in Season 1 having a runtime of about 15 minutes each. Which is surprising because despite the short runtime, each episode manages to cause just enough psychological damage in those few short minutes. Basically, what I'm getting at here is that the Diabolik Lovers anime is just an absolute mess in terms of writing, and the whole anime is more or less just one big advertisement screaming at you to buy their main product, which is of course the games. So now I'm gonna move on to the execution of the overall plot in the anime. Like I mentioned, the first season is supposed to be following the events of the first game, Haunted Dark Bridal. But it's honestly hard to say that the first season has any real solid plot, because although we do get a few moments here and there that show that the anime is following the timeline of events of Haunted Dark Bridal, the majority of the episodes, except for maybe the first episode and the last few episodes, don't have much plot relevance. Like I said, the sadistic acts of the brothers towards Yui are very much the main highlight of the anime. There aren't really any defining arcs that take place throughout the anime, and each episode tends to follow the exact same formula. Yui wakes up, tries to function in some degree of normalcy in her new life with the Sakamakis. She runs into one of the brothers, and through some absolutely insignificant action ignites their anger. Random unexplained flashbacks of mommy issues. Yui gets attacked and gets her blood sucked. And then the episode ends on a cliffhanger of one of the brothers saying something cryptic to Yui. And that's pretty much how every episode plays out. I swear nothing of any real significance or logical sense takes place throughout the majority of these episodes. Like little bits of conflict are built up in every episode, but they never really end up being explained. And then the cliffhangers at the end of every episode end up going nowhere, because each episode without explanation starts in a new time and location, and it's as if the cliffhanger never happened. Like every episode ends with one of the brothers saying some type of edgy, cryptic piece of dialogue, but none of what they say is ever explained or brought up again, and it's basically just them saying stuff because they think it sounds cool. As I've already gone over, a lot of the lore of the series isn't explained or elaborated on. We're just supposed to already know what's happening. The sacrificial bride thing isn't explained or expanded on. Yui's father being a vampire hunter and the church being a secret organization of vampire hunters is also never mentioned, nor are the details behind the deal the church made with the Sakamakis. Like, this is all pretty important information that is entirely left out. The backstories of the brothers aren't really explained. Their dark upbringing's not really explained. Again, not that it would have really made a difference to how they act in the story. We find out nothing about Yui's father. That guy's just gone, as are the Sakamaki's father. Like, the anime just leaves you with more questions than answers, which granted may be the point. Narrative-wise, absolutely no development is given to any of these characters. As per usual with most reverse harem protagonists, Yui is a pretty underwhelming and underdeveloped main character. She makes a lot of dumb decisions and seems to always be unaware of the situations that she's in. Like, girl, you know that these guys are vampires. Why the hell are you getting close to them? Like, look, I'll cut the girl some slack when it comes to being weak, cause this girl is like a speck of dust compared to these men, and there's no way I could expect this girl to actually succeed in throwing hands with these brothers. Like, let's be realistic here. The odds are stacked up against her. But what I will fault this girl for is how absolutely dumb she is in actively trying to get close to these brothers. Like, she goes up to them and tries to start up conversations with them as if she doesn't already know that these guys are crazy. Granted, it could be like a coping mechanism, but it's still just an entirely stupid thing to do, like from a survival standpoint. Like, this girl had the opportunity to run away, and the bitch stayed just because she was nosy. Like, why? I will say that from what I've seen, Yui's written much better in the games. She tries to fight back more than she does in the anime, and is a lot more aware of her surroundings. But anime Yui, she's just written so bad. As for the brothers, they're just consistently awful throughout the anime. There is zero development for them. I mean, in some cases like Subaru, we get the opposite of character development. This guy ends up becoming just like his other brothers. The brothers are just as bad at the end as they are in the beginning, staying complete sadistic and delusional psychopaths. They gain zero respect for Yui. I mean, it's as if they are genuinely physically incapable of doing so. It's like their instinct to be assholes to this girl. This lack of character development also has the ending make no sense. Because when the brothers team up to get Cordelia out of Yui, it's unclear whether or not these brothers actually care about Yui's survival in the slightest. Like, they go back and forth between caring that Yui is dead and then being completely unfazed, and it's just hilarious. All the characters are just written really bad, and it's generally impossible to have any sort of attachment to any of them. Another thing that is pretty inconsistent and confusing in the anime is the overall tone throughout the anime. It's hard to tell whether or not this series wants to be taken seriously because the shift in tone is so drastic at times. It's like whiplash. Like, we already know that Diabolik Lovers as a series is supposed to have a darker tone, but for some reason in the anime, there's a lot of odd, almost wholesome moments that are just comical and so unserious to everything else going on. Like the scene where Reiji shows up all menacingly to Yui's room, only to hand her a neatly laid out school uniform. Like he's a mom getting their kid ready for their first day of school. The Sakamakis are shown acting all big and bad, but then they get upset when daddy doesn't show up to their annual dinner party.
I thought this was a classy party.
And the moment that really made me lose it was the 100% cranberry juice. The 100% sugar-free cranberry juice. There's no way that was not supposed to be funny. There's just so many oddly wholesome moments like these that take place, where Yui is all chipper with the brothers, and then the tone just randomly changes and Yui remembers that she's being held captive. Like, Yui goes from casually making takoyaki for Ayato and pestering him to help clean up, to like seconds later pleading for her life. Like, it's such a weird escalation of events. Like, these moments, along with the romance music that plays in the backgrounds of the scenes that are straight out of a horror movie, are just so random and confusing that it's comical. When it comes to the writing of the Diabolik Lovers anime, it's really hard to understand what's supposed to be the point of everything. Like, of course at this point we've already established that the anime is intended to advertise the games, but with how badly everything is just kind of mushed together, it's really hard to tell what part of the games are getting sold here. Again, this kind of ties into the whole issue of otome adaptations failing to condense all the aspects of a multiple route game into one unified story. But Diabolik Lovers really is by far just the worst case I've seen of this in any otome adaptation. Looking up the games and then rewatching the anime, I honestly can't tell what parts of the games are actually being advertised, because there's just so much pointless shit that's given attention in the anime, rather than the actual major plot points of the characters in the games. Like, instead of focusing on the special individual traits of the Sakamaki brothers that would draw you into playing the games to see more of their routes, the anime just highlights a bunch of random plot points that go nowhere and become plot holes by the end of the anime. And it's just like, why? How do you fail so bad at doing the one thing that you were supposed to do, which is to advertise the character routes so that people will play the games? Why are you focusing on everything else but that? In the anime, the brothers all just kind of blend together, cause they all pretty much end up doing the exact same stuff whenever they're on screen. Like, why are the plot holes more memorable than the actual characters? Like, after watching the anime, my thoughts are not really all that much on the brothers. Instead, I'm thinking about all the distracting plot holes that still got me scratching my damn head. Like, for example, again, how the hell did Richter put the heart of a grown-ass woman into the body of a baby Yui? Did he somehow shrink the heart? Did Cordelia for some reason have a tiny-ass baby heart? How the hell did he even get the heart in there? Did he use magic or something? Did he perform open heart surgery on a baby? Why isn't there a scar? And why is none of this explained? Another plot hole that stands out more than the brothers is the Seiji plot hole. Why do the Sakamakis put so much effort in keeping secrets about him from Yui if they go on to say later that he's a nobody? What was so important about his journal? Why and how were the journal writings erased? And why the hell did Richter even destroy the journal? This is another thing that's brought up in the anime multiple times rather than selling the routes of the brothers, and it just goes nowhere. Nothing is important about Yui's dad in the anime. The Sakamakis literally cannot decide whether or not this guy is important because they keep going back and forth on it. Another pointless thing that's brought up is the whole night school plot. There's such a big deal made by the brothers about how they go to night school and how Yui has to adjust to this schedule, but nothing important really happens at the school. Rather than getting actual plot points from the games that involve the school, like Shu's involvement in the music club and Yui trying to figure out how to escape with her new night school schedule, we just get a bunch of random Yui torture moments that are complete wastes of time. And by the way, I just gotta ask, because it's starting to drive me crazy, why the hell are any of the brothers in school in the first place? Aren't these bitches like hundreds of years old? They all trash on Shu in the games for getting held back, but aren't they all like super seniors at this point? How long does it take a vampire to graduate high school? If these teenage geriatric vampires don't check themselves into a retirement home already, I swear I'm about to be like Remy and have the garlic on hand, because why do all these old ass vampires keep going to high school? Gotta say, another pointless plot point that I just love is that for absolutely no reason at all, we are given a cliffhanger implying that Yui turns into a vampire at the end of season 1, only for that to not happen once we get to season 2. Like, what was even the point of that? The Diabolik Lovers anime as a whole is just one big controversial mess. There's no message to be said throughout any point of this anime. It's just pure chaos. Diabolik Lovers is definitely in the trenches when it comes to reverse harem Ultimate game adaptations. It's really hard to think of an Ultimate game adaptation worse than Diabolik Lovers. Well, maybe Brothers Conflict comes pretty close. I will say that there is some humor to be found in just how bad and ridiculous this anime can be at times. And at the end of the day, I guess that's what makes this anime oddly somewhat iconic. In terms of my thoughts on the Diabolik Lovers games, and I guess the franchise as a whole, I was surprised to see how many people seem to genuinely like these games, and to praise this franchise for how different it is from other reverse harems. I've heard people say that the games are written very well, unlike the anime, but I guess it's hard for me to understand because I haven't played the games myself, and again, I just personally don't really see the appeal of this series. I can respect that these games and the franchise as a whole are supposed to be on the more darker and unconventional side. However, I guess I just personally can't get behind it, because a lot of the cruel treatment that Yui goes through at the hands of the Sakamaki brothers just doesn't really seem purposeful to me, and it just comes off as cruelty for the sake of cruelty. The use of sadism and masochism as a way to excuse this aspect of the series also throws me off a bit, because once again, Yui is in no way a masochist, and I just personally don't think that Diabolik Lovers comes off as an S&M themed story. The majority of it just seems like pointless abuse to me. Like, I'm a person who enjoys darker stories, but Diabolik Lovers doesn't really do it for me. At the end of the day, I do think that it's quite interesting the reputation that Diabolik Lovers has managed to create for itself over the years. Despite how trash it is, I guess it succeeded in bringing attention to itself, and after all these years, somehow it is still remembered. It may not be remembered for anything good, but more or less, it's somehow an icon of the reverse harem genre. Anyways, that's gonna be the end of the video. I hope that this was to some degree enjoyable. This video took a long time to come out due to a lot of technical difficulties and whatnot, but it's out now, and I just hope that the next video won't take as long as this one. And anyways, if you made it to the end of the video, thanks for watching, and yeah. Diabolik Lovers is trash. Yet somehow it's the people's trash.